welcome, welcome, welcome. Health Issues, your host, Chris Sylvain. We appreciate you. Watch this show closely today. We're dealing with I believe, the largest issue of our time today. And we're dealing with prison violence, prison brutality, inhumane conditions in prisons, and particularly we're going to speak about the Orleans Parish Prison system. We have an attorney with Southern Poverty Law Center, Ms. Katie Schwartzmann. Welcome, Ms. Schwartzmann.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're excited to have you, and for those who have not read the papers or seen it in the news media, Ms. Schwartzmann is the lead attorney that's exposing the issues at the Orleans Parish Prison. The house of detention was closed, and the Sheriff Guzman himself said that part of it had to do with not only the Department of Justice but the lawsuit against them. And so there's many things that Ms. Schwartzman won't be able to discuss, but we're taking that into account, but a lot of things we can't talk about.
That's right.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about Katie Schwartzmann.
I am the managing attorney for the Southern Poverty Law Center here in New Orleans. Southern Poverty is a civil rights law firm. We're a nonprofit that's actually headquartered in Montgomery, Alabama, and has been doing civil rights work in the Deep South since the 70s. The New Orleans office of our organization opened in 2006 and did mostly education work around the school system here and juvenile justice work, and also now are working around Orleans Parish Prison.
I was an employee of the Orleans Parish Prison years ago, and I know firsthand about the brutality that happened in the jail. Back then it was through SID and the beating of inmates, and I was there hearing about, never witnessed visually, but the culture of rape and beatings was just a normal part of the prison at Orleans Parish Prison. Back then it was the same OPP, House of D, and the culture was that nobody would tell because they wouldn't ever expect that there would be any help. It would feel weak for a man to say he had been raped, for a man to say that he had been beat. The culture of nobody will tell was a part of it. Nobody would ever be a rat. Do you find that that's...
Absolutely. I think it takes a lot of bravery on the part of the men and women that have come forward to talk about the conditions in OPP. What you mentioned is true, which is that the folks that are in there are very vulnerable. Every kind of aspect of their lives are controlled by the deputies and the authorities at the jail. So our clients that have come forward to tell their stories and to try to make the jail change have been incredibly brave in doing so.
Those who create the systems, and I would say this, creating the systems, whereas, and I've said, I've heard Sheriff Guzman on the news media speak about as if he didn't know anything was going on. He said he gets his reports of rapes, and there's, I think, 3 a year or some unheard of number. And I think the Lens did a piece on that. City Business did a great piece on it. And Time-Speaking, it need a lot of help. I don't expect you to comment on this. That's my statements. But this idea of how could it be all of this is going on? If you keep your ears closed, okay, but this is a culture. This is happening day in and day out, and it's not right. Right.
I mean, sure, I think we've been on notice for a really long time that there are serious problems at Orleans Parish Prison. In 2009, as you mentioned, the Department of Justice came in and they had this big findings letter which concluded that the conditions were unconstitutional. They turned that over to the sheriff. They asked him to correct the deficiencies. In the meantime, there were several federal panels that had hearings on prison rape that found that rape at OPP was higher than the national average, right, and systematically underreported. Right. So all of these pretty high-profile federal government findings were coming out, right, in addition to just general media coverage. There were Times-Picayune articles about guys that were showing up for trial with blackened eyes, and so that's a very kind of public signal that something is really wrong and there's a lot of violence in there. And so I think really that we've all been on notice that there were serious problems there for a while. And in fact, when we filed this case, I was really surprised by, I expected kind of the public to immediately understand and identify with it, but the level of support and outpouring that we've gotten from the public, just in random strangers on the street saying thank you, thank you, thank you, showed us that this is something that has been a problem in our community and very deeply affecting the families in our communities for a long time.
Well, tell us a little bit more about this Department of Justice, because I know we can go there a little bit, but because they pull their prisoners out. At least the federal government, they pull their prisoners out.
Right. Yes, so there was one findings letter in 2009 where they said the conditions are unconstitutional, and they listed all these reasons why, including violence and rape and medical care, all these things that are really deficient at the jail, and asked the sheriff to correct it. He did not. We ultimately filed our lawsuit, and the Department of Justice came back in and did a second investigation the second week of April, and just issued another findings letter in which they said, not only do the problems that we identified in 2009 persist, but in some instances they've actually gotten worse. So there have been now these two pretty lengthy investigations by the federal government finding that the conditions there are a problem. And after that, then, as you mentioned, the U.S. Marshals pulled all of the federal prisoners out of there, and then immigrations pulled all of the immigration detainees out of there as well. Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about how bad it can be. There have inmates that have been killed in jail. There have been, the suicides, and how bad are we talking about here?
The most recent Department of Justice findings letter focused on suicides in particular, and identified that those deaths that have occurred in OPP, many of them were in fact preventable. Could have been prevented by changes in policies that the Sheriff's Office failed to implement. And so our case actually is about two things. The first is violence and violent conditions in there, and a failure to protect people from harm when they go in there. And the second is a lack of mental health care. We know in New Orleans we have a mental health care crisis. There's nowhere for people who are in mental health crisis to go. The emergency rooms, usually receive these people. But we don't have the long-term psychiatric beds that we need, and so what we see as a community is a lot of times these folks are landing at the jail. And the Sheriff's Office has an obligation once they arrive there to care for them, and that's one of the major deficiencies that we identify in our lawsuit, is that folks are not provided with mental health care in the way that they need to be or treated, and that results in a lot of the suicides that were identified by the Department of Justice.
So basically, and anybody could find themselves in jail. Anybody's kid, college kid, or whatever, they can think that they're immune to it. They find themselves in jail, and I think City Business did and we appreciate them, nice report on, I think the guy's name was Holman whatever, and they talked about how he went in there and he was only there for 2 weeks, and the guards beat him vociferously. They literally told him, because he called City Business, that they beat the guy. The guards beat him, and then they had inmates beat him, because I know that for a fact that guards, either they'll beat you, or it's real easy for them to say, no, I won't put my hands on you, I'll set you up where the inmates will take care of you.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's something that our clients will talk about, is this concept of enforcers. If the deputies don't like something that you're doing, they will set you in a cell with somebody that they know to be your enemy, or put you in a position that they know is going to leave you vulnerable to attack, and kind of intentionally allow this violence to happen in there as a way of enforcing whatever it is that they want to accomplish. And to go back to touch real briefly on what you started with there, I think you're right that sometimes people say, well, this is how does this jail affect me, and how does this affect my life? And you mentioned the City Business article. The truth is that really any one of us as New Orleanians could land in there, because it is a jail, it is a temporary holding facility. If one of us were to get picked up on a DUI, or somebody's kid gets into a bar fight or something like that, they're going into that facility.
Exactly.
And so actually, there's a chance that these problems at the jail could really affect any one of us.
Right. But in a greater point we'll touch on later is that even if it wouldn't affect us, right is right, wrong is wrong. There's certain thing is justice. It's a strange word in New Orleans. It's called justice. And
that's right. And human rights. And yes. And so I think there's the larger point, which is that when we incarcerate people, we do not, as part of their sentence, impose a requirement that they be beaten or potentially killed or raped. Those are not the penalties that we impose on people as punishment for crimes, and that's what those are the things that we're seeing happening in Orleans Parish Prison, and it is in fact a human rights issue.
Let's talk about prison rape for a minute. Prison rape is an unspoken of thing. There are a few websites out there, kind of where people are organizing against this prison rape thing. But the strange thing, the amount of rapes that actually go on in jail, will we ever be able to get a true reporting? Because what ends up happening is people in jail for years, the rapes become so commonplace where it becomes a culture within the institution itself.
I think they become commonplace, and I think also that there's a great amount of fear and stigma around reporting these things. Just because, anyone who's been a victim of sexual assault knows how difficult it is to come forward and talk about that in a public way. Right. And then when you add a layer on top of that, which is that these are primarily men that we're talking about, there's a lot of cultural, I guess, gravamen against coming forward and talking about this. And the people that are brave enough to come forward, it takes a lot of courage on their part. And I think for that reason also, prison rape is probably always going to be somewhat underreported because it's so difficult to talk about.
Yeah, how's a man call and he tells his family, hey, look, I've been raped in jail, but he knows he's going to be there for 10 more years. It's not, and then, it's one thing, they call him the free man. The free man's never going to do anything for you. He's not going to help you. So what's the sense of it, and then the idea of being a rat, right. This concept of a rat, if we can even touch upon that.
That's right. Yeah, it's extremely difficult for people to come forward because there is this culture in there, as I mentioned before, about like enforcers and maintaining order, and kind of this notion that anybody who reports a crime in there becomes a target. So it's difficult for people to come forward and feel safe, and that's a cultural issue in the jail. The policies, the proper policies and procedures and staffing have to be in place to make sure that people are going to feel comfortable coming forward and talking about what's happened to them, because otherwise they're not going to come forward because they're going to feel like they will be targets.
So not only do they have the guards who are saying, if you report that you've been raped, then that means the guard didn't do his job, so therefore the guard doesn't want you to report that they've been raped, because then the guard will get in trouble, and then the prisoners would not want the person to report that they've been raped, because obviously they don't want to get caught and end up with a charge. So that inmate literally has no recourse. He's literally, and no matter how big he is, and I know this being there, no matter how strong and powerful and big the inmate is, he can't fight off 20 men.
That's right.
So we're dealing with horror stories.
Yeah, the stories are horror stories.
Like they talk about in Iraq, the Abu Ghraib or whatever, this the prison or whatever, that it wouldn't be so bad if we weren't in this technologically advanced, richest nation in the world.
Mm-hmm. That's right, and the things that are happening in our jail should concern everybody in the city of New Orleans. Prison
rape, beatings from guards and inmates, a culture of being unsafe. Let's talk about what could happen, because systems can be created where the jail could actually be a safe place. People can do their time, but it could be safe. They don't have to be subjected to beatings and rape.
Yeah, there are corrections models, there are best practices that could be implemented. You know, I know that when the Department of Justice comes in, they bring with them a team of experts. There are folks who really specialize in how to run a safe corrections facility. And there are other jails in the country that have struggled with violence and have turned themselves around. I mean, there are people who know how to do this and can help us implement the right policies and safety protocols to stop this stuff.
Right.
It's just a question of having it be implemented.
Pure and simple. Just putting the time in, spending the money, and doing what has to be done.
Right.
New Orleans, Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the world. New Orleans is the highest in Louisiana. That makes this probably the most important. We're at the point in the entire world where all eyes should be on OPP in Orleans Parish Prison System.
I think that's right. I mean, in Louisiana, I think the statistics are 1 in 77 Louisianians is in jail, and 1 in 26 is either in jail or under the custody of the Department of Corrections on probation or on parole. That's pretty astonishing. Our incarceration numbers are really high, and then as you mentioned, OPP itself is the largest jail per capita. So this is really an opportunity for us as a city, and now that we're seeing these things kind of really high profile about what's happening in this jail, right, for us as a city to step back and for our leaders to step back and say, okay, why do we have such a large jail? Right. Because size does contribute to how out of control the conditions are. It makes it harder to manage, obviously. It means that you're commingling a lot of low-level offenders with higher-level offenders. Right. So I think, you know, we as a city are at a crossroads where we can step back and say, what really is the right size jail for the city of New Orleans? Who do we actually need to be locking up? And how do we try to make this jail the right size for our community? And some of that discussion has started happening at the city level. The mayor convened a working group on the right size of the jail. They brought in an expert to talk about how big it should be. And that expert made a recommendation of just over 1,400 beds. I think he said 1,438 was the right number of beds that we need for a city of our population, adjusting for our crime rate and the historic kind of trends in the jail. What we have right now is 3,400 beds. So we have a jail that's twice the size of what this expert recommends. Now at the time of Katrina, it was even crazier because we had about 7,000 beds, which was absolutely astronomically out of control. It still is very, very high, but when Katrina hit, the jail flooded, as did a lot of the city, and all of the buildings were not brought back online. So since Katrina, we've been at about 3,300 beds. But what the expert, you know, that made the recommendation to the mayor's working group said is you're still over double what you should be for a city your size.
Let's talk about these funding sources, this payment per inmate, where it's profitable to keep inmates in jail even.
Well, that's the other thing the expert said was New Orleans is one of only 2 places that funds its jail the way that we do, which is that we as taxpayers pay a per diem, meaning a daily rate, for every person that's in Sheriff Guzman's custody. That amount is $22.39 a day. So for every day that he has somebody in there, he gets $22.39 from the city. And then on top of that, he gets lump sum allocations to the tune of a couple $1 million for operational expenses and medical expenses. Okay. So what the expert said was, you know, this funding system that y'all have doesn't make a lot of sense and incentivizes keeping people in there because it's a per day system, versus if the city would move to paying for housing of folks in a lump sum payment, then that would remove that incentive to keep people longer to get that extra day of payment.
And I want to look at this in a second, because if justice is our priority here, if safety and justice, I actually believe, and help me if I'm wrong, that if somebody operated in the sense of justice and righteousness, it wouldn't even matter about those external structures. That the fact that incentives affect how long somebody would be in jail is criminal.
It is. And funding shouldn't be a motivator when you're talking about the justice system. I mean, it's called the justice system,
lives.
Right? Yeah. So the funding should not be the focus. But we know that money is a big driver of the criminal justice system overall. I mean, the costs associated with it and the societal costs, and you know, if you look at the privatization of prisons and that sort of thing, I mean, there is money in the incarceration systems. And so what we as taxpayers and citizens can ask of our leaders is that we try to minimize that and keep our justice system aimed at what it's really supposed to be aimed toward, which is keeping us safe and keeping our community safe. And so that's where we can, you know, kind of plug into this dialogue with the city about the right funding for OPP, to say we really want a justice system that focuses on justice, and we got to remove these financial considerations.
And if you're right, at least don't have perverse incentives going the other way. Even though, in and of itself, if somebody can show that since we've changed the incentive, we lower the amount of people in jail, I think that somebody needs to be arrested, because it's saying that the incentive had an effect on their decision-making policy as an individual. I think that's what that defines corruption. That the amount of money that they would make or the amount of power that they would have would actually even be affected by the incentive. But I agree with you. Let's change the incentives right away. Let's talk a little bit about some other incentives. Which structure does this Sheriff Guzman have in relationship to the city council and the mayor?
Well, the sheriff is his own office, so he's elected by the residents of Orleans Parish, and the way in which he is accountable to the city is that, meaning to city council and the mayor, is just that they approve his budget. The city also actually owns a couple of the buildings over there, including the House of Detention, which was recently closed, and I think they may own Old Parish Prison also. But the sheriff, under Louisiana law, is responsible for administering the jail. And then the burden is on the city to pay for it. That's how Louisiana sets it up. The sheriff administers and the parish or the city council pays. So his structure, I guess, or interaction with city government, meaning the mayor and city council, is in that his budget goes through the budgeting process.
So the mayor and the city council, the mayor himself has a direct say, because whoever controls the paycheck controls the institution, more or less. So they literally can shut the system down if they want to. City
council could change, could put restrictions on funding, for example. Sure, because those are the main, you know, financing streams that go into the jail, and so our city council members have direct oversight over that.
Okay, good. And I think Representative Council Member Guidry is over the criminal justice group herself, and that's a whole nother issue. But so the public, we have a say-so, because we can speak to our council member and to the mayor to speak about whether we feel it affects us or not, that this is, we're dealing with a horrific situation here. And something needs to be dealt with. So phone calls can be made. Let me ask you this. For family members, you say you've received a lot of support, and 70%, we had Dr. Peter Scharf here from Tulane, said there's probably 70% of, in many neighborhoods, of the African-American males are in jail in some neighborhoods. That's just how bad it is, the amount of, and we see the police cars traveling through the neighborhood, so we can see them, you know, picking people up, and we won't even talk about the fact that it's mostly for drug crimes, and African-American males don't use as many drugs as many other groups, so that's a whole nother issue, though. But the families who have family members in jail and they feel that they've been abused, who can they call?
They can contact us. One important thing for people to know about this case is that the lawsuit is not for money. We're not asking for any damages. We're asking to change the jail. The only thing we're seeking is a change in policy to reform the jail, to make it safer, to make sure people get their mental health care. So if folks have a family member that's in there now, and they think that we need to talk to them or hear their story, they can contact the Southern Poverty Law Center. And we have investigators that have been going out and responding to those requests for help. Some of them are emergencies, some of them we have to put on a waiting list because we have so many people that are calling us, but we're trying to get out and talk to everybody that contacts us.
What about inmates in jail?
They can call us directly. They can call us directly.
Okay. Because in an optimal system, we would have a a proper system, any type of management system, you need to have some type of evaluation process to hear from the prisoners of what's going on, how they're being treated. You can't trust your guards. So what I would assume that it would be, they would the Justice Department would expect some third party to be able to hear what's going on. Wouldn't you agree that that should be a part of it?
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that we will do. You know, like any law office, we respond to requests for representation when they come in. So if somebody calls us and says, I need to talk to you about something that's happening to me in the jail, we go out and have a visit with that person. Okay.
Now you guys will be flooded, and I know after this program you'll be flooded some more and flooded some more. Is there any relief? I mean, is there any way we can expand this and let's blow it up? I mean, let's call it what it is. Is there any way we can get some relief? I don't know. I mean, maybe there's no answer, but I think something has to happen here.
You know, I think you touched on something important earlier, and this, I guess, is maybe a little bit separate than what you were just asking, but there has been a lot of movement and support recently in the faith community also with encouraging folks to contact City Council and be engaged in this budget process.
That's right.
And make sure that your council members know that this is something that has affected you and your family.
Okay. All right. And I will say this, you know, we got a couple of more minutes as we're going on. For Sheriff Guzman, he has a responsibility to find out what's going on, and and he has to know what's going on. It's his guards that are in there. I know from Sheriff Fody, he had it beforehand, and I know it was corrupt back then, and call me whatever you want. Same thing for Sheriff Guzman. It's so bad and so horrible. Stop getting on the radio talking about how great this institution is. It's corrupt. I'm sick of it. I don't even want to hear you no more, and I tell you that. Last question. You're finding some of the same situations in schools. Southern Poverty Law Center is working through that.
We are. You know, our office focuses on what we call the school-to-prison pipeline, meaning this idea that if we don't educate our kids and invest in our kids at the education level, and we treat them like criminals when they're children, then they're going to land in the prison system. And so, you know, a lot of my clients, unfortunately, that I see in OPP now are kids that are people that were failed by the education system or were failed by other support systems. And so another part of my office's work is to do work in the schools, both to make sure that kids who are special needs have those needs met, and also that kids are not treated like criminals when they go to school, meaning arrested, or that police aren't able to arrest kids for minor offenses, because that just funnels them right into the prison that we're just talking about.
Thank you so much. Katie Schwartzmann, she's a hero. Call your council member, let them know what's going on. We got to fight for this. I don't care what you think about the people that have committed crimes, and the truth of the matter is they've been jailed mostly for drug crimes, and it's African-American men, and they're not using all the drugs. They're not using the cocaine, the marijuana, or none of the drugs. They've been herded by the police, and the police, you have a responsibility. Let's stop this. Health issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much.